Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening, and welcome to Umlink Energy Speaks Back, powered by Hark. My name is Paul Webb. I'm the founder of B2B Energy, and I'm your host. And weekly, I present to you experts from around the world. And today, I'm in Boulder, Colorado. Our purpose, as always, is to provide a good understanding of energy management knowledge from around the world, which is available today for us to deliver savings that impact on our planet. So before I get into today's interview, I would like to recognize our sponsors, who are Umlink. They are taking the confusion out of energy management. Clean Energy Revolution for their knowledge and networking in the renewable world. B2B Energy for the 11-week energy program. Hark Systems, renowned for their energy software. Alexis Energy for power management initiatives, led by Vision for their LED and controls, Symwatts for their electronics and EV transition, Carbon Black Global for their waste energy initiatives, Cinefex for their insulation coating, SmartCool for their AC initiatives around the world, and lastly, our certificate partners, Ester Energy. So welcome to episode 73 of Umlink Energy Speaks Back, powered by Hark. And my special guest today enables global companies to meet with climate action and communications goals. And you're going to hear some insights to how she delivers that and working with global companies around the world. So without any further ado, I give you Amy Haddon. Good afternoon, Amy, and how are you today?
I'm very well, Paul. Thank you. And thanks so much for having me as your guest.
Brilliant. And it is good afternoon for you, but it's obviously good evening for me because you're in Denver.
I
and
am.
We've had a jealous conversation because I love skiing. I love the snow. And you told me you've just had a really great fall of snow. And have you been out there lately doing a bit of skiing or country?
Yes, getting into the mountains a little bit to do a bit of snowshoeing. It was a late winter in coming. We had a pretty dry December, but we've had very consistent snowfall since then, and it's full on winter here in the Colorado mountains.
Right. We keep seeing signs of snow in the UK. I think we're going to get some in February sometime. And I'm looking forward to see a little bit of snow. It's always nice to finish off the winter in the UK with some snow. But our snow only lasts a couple of days and it turns to slush very quickly. It's not as pretty as it is in Colorado. So anyway, so Amy, we've met through our LinkedIn network and we've had a couple of conversations via LinkedIn. We'd never met sort of via Zoom, but strangely off air, we was discussing all these different people that we know in person. So it's quite bizarre how the world is shrinking as we speak. So Amy, it's really great for you to come along. Can you give us some background to yourself as an individual and where you've come from within the industry?
Yeah, I'm happy to. So I am not I am not an engineer or an energy specialist by training. I was drawn to the renewables industry specifically because of its role in the climate crisis and mitigating the climate crisis. My professional training and background up until that point had been in organizational development, change management, performance management with inside organizations. And I had a moment of real inflection in my career where I needed to consider what my next step was. And about that time became really consciously aware of the climate crisis and felt magnetized to pursue a career in service of trying to intervene in that crisis. At the time, that was in 2007, renewable energy was still relatively nascent in its development, especially in the United States. It was outside of large hydropower, it made up less than 2% of the US grid. And a lot of a lot of the work that had been done, I think, was frankly trying to counter concerns around price, reliability, even how renewable energy was being delivered. And there was at the same time an increasing interest, I think, particularly in organizations, for how renewable energy could contribute to the sort of blossoming ESG or CSR sector. And so our organization was really at the vanguard of that movement in the United States in terms of helping organizations to start to take stock of their emissions and then start to use renewable energy as a means to begin to reduce those emissions. At the time, the industry was still relatively limited. For most organizations, using certificates was their best option. They may have pursued on-site solutions. They were still relatively expensive and not as efficient as they are today. And large-scale contracting with developers or other organizations hadn't really yet come to fruition. And so a lot of the work in those early days was really helping organizations to understand the value of renewable energy certificates in particular as a market signal to create additional demand for renewable energy. And one of my colleagues likens it to buying organic produce, that it was a matter of convincing organizations to pay a premium in order to make use of renewables, understanding that that premium would feed into demand cycle over time that would bring down the cost of renewable power. And of course, that's precisely what has happened. As the technologies have improved, as demand has increased, and as markets have become more liberalized, it's enabled this huge explosion in the corporate renewable energy sector, where companies can now work much more directly with generators who are producing power. They have greater market access around the world to that power. It's not just limited to the United States or to Europe, and markets are opening up all the time. And at the same time, unfortunately, the climate crisis has only continued to worsen. And so the pressure now on companies, particularly large emitters, to begin to transform and become zero emission has increased at a very high rate as well. And so today, the marketplace is completely different than it was 15 years ago.
Yeah, totally.
Yeah, and and I'm talking specifically about the corporate sector, but certainly we see that in the utility space. And if you had told me at that time that that the climate crisis and the attention to abating the climate crisis would have reached the point of urgency and attention that it has today, I probably would not have believed you. I mean, it's really been quite a journey for the last 15 years.
Yeah.
So a lot of the work that I do today is in thought leadership, in energy and sustainability, emissions management and reduction, and really thinking about how to bring innovation, policy, action together to help encourage organizations to take a leading role in the energy transition.
You mentioned, thank you for that introduction. There's quite a few things I want to pick up on there, but you mentioned the word urgency. Are you seeing that in the corporate world from organizations? Are they addressing the urgency that's there, or are they still playing it like the lip service, or the greenwashing the situation, or is it action now?
Yeah, that's a great question and a very important question. It's a blend of both, I would say. I think there are many organizations that have really begun to understand that the urgency is not just a moral urgency, which I think does exist. And for some leaders, that moral urgency is definitely a driver for action. But they're also starting to see that as a threat multiplier, climate change is having these repercussive effects, particularly with the destabilization of the climate and the increasing frequency of extreme weather events. Those events are now starting to have a material impact on business that is increasing their risk profile. And investors are starting to sit up and take notice of that. And so I think for many organizations, they are starting to see either that increasing pressure in the financial market that is leading them to take action because they're now expected to, or they're seeing that their business is legitimately threatened by the climate crisis, whether that is a physical risk from something like an extreme weather event or a transition risk where they risk, for example, a stranded asset that will be left behind as we make this transition to a net zero economy, that suddenly organizations are saying, oh, we've got to do this to protect our longevity, to create resilience in our business, to retain our license to operate effectively. Now, that is not universal. And are there bad actors that are greenwashing, that are setting unrealistic goals that are far out in the future, or frankly are laggards? Absolutely. But the pressure, and what I would call sort of the ecosystem pressure, where now it's coming from all stakeholders and it's being pushed down into value chains from buyers, that pressure is just increasing exponentially. And so, yes, companies are taking legitimate action and increasingly taking legitimate action. For probably the first time in a long time, I feel extremely hopeful that we've got a chance to really turn the corner because of that action and the seriousness with which organizations are approaching the situation.
You asked me about the word or the abbreviation ESG, it would have gone straight over my head, and I'm in the industry. Now I'm hearing organizations mention that a lot
Exactly.
now.
Exactly.
And that has got to be through like the peer pressure from other organizations that are entering into that legislation as such.
That's right. I absolutely. It's competitive pressure. It's that financial market pressure. In some cases, regulatory pressure. I also think that the pandemic has been an accelerator. And I think, interestingly, it actually is predominantly on the social front that's true, that just the understanding that our species is relatively vulnerable, and that these very disruptive events have the potential to affect global economies, global livelihoods, has been an accelerator. And so now suddenly, as greater attention is being paid to social welfare, it has a knock-on effect with environmental welfare. And as we see supply chains undergoing massive disruption as a result of the pandemic, it suddenly brings into clearer focus that the climate crisis could create much more significant disruption even than we have seen in the last 2 years. And really bringing to the fore where those vulnerabilities are in operations and in supply chains, and a need to really look at the vulnerabilities and address those in order to stave off those increasing risks.
The pandemic also, for me, opened up other things regarding it showed us that it could make a difference. We were seeing clear waters, we were seeing fresh air, clear skies. All of a sudden we knew that the target that we're heading for is achievable, because very quickly overnight, especially where I live in the UK, we see big differences, and you start thinking, wow, this is achievable now. But it it didn't take long to start going back the other way. But at least we could see, we had a glimpse of what it could be, didn't we?
It did. And I think the other piece of that for me, Paul, is that I think we tend to think that the climate crisis is so large and so almost ethereal that it's been difficult for us to get our arms around real action, and to even think that we have a longer time frame than science suggests that we have. But if you look at the global exercise of developing a vaccine that happened in the pandemic, I mean, that was an extraordinary historical circumstance that brought together these scientific and academic communities to do something that we literally thought was impossible. You can apply that to the climate crisis and to the rapid development and scaling of renewable energy and clean technologies. I don't think it's out of reach for us to say that these transformations that we need to make are possible. It's just a question of, can we apply the appropriate political will, the appropriate investment from the business community, and then I think just the infusion of capital that will be needed in general to bring solutions to scale across the world. With the speed at which we need them to occur. And so for me, yes, it was like, wow, blue skies in some of these polluted cities are possible. But not only that, it is possible for us to collaborate globally to very rapidly come together and develop life-saving solutions.
So another example of that, we all, I'm part of the clean energy revolution. There's 185 individuals on this joint network around the world that we're all talking the same language. Yeah. And I always say this, that we all speak different languages, but we all speak that same language of reducing kilowatt hours and reducing the emissions and saving our planet. Now, we've seen that happen. We've seen, we discussed earlier about how the world's getting smaller regarding the people we know. Who would thought that we both worked for the same company many years ago, and we know the same people? That you're thousands of miles away from me, and we've only networked recently to then find out that we know exactly the same people. It is coming together, and the network of renewable people and in out the clean revolution side of it, the mission, and I think we've got the people, we've got the solutions. I think what we're really missing now is the leadership to drive this forward, and that has to be taken from the top. And we had COP, and I don't know, have you got any feelings about how you felt COP went and the result from COP?
I do. I have some strong feelings, actually.
Don't worry, I haven't got into trouble yet from anyone, so you're okay.
Good,
Maybe
good.
this is the first time, but
Maybe.
we're okay.
I had the privilege of being able to be at the event, Paul, which was for a lifelong activist and someone in this industry, it's sort of a bucket list item to be able to go and see the sausage being made, if you will. And it was a wonderful and intense experience. And at the end of the day, I was extremely disappointed with the result. I think many people were really looking at this event, this sort of historic 5-year anniversary of the Paris Agreement, as the last best hope, effectively, and we still did not get to a point of keeping a 1.5 degree trajectory for warming fully alive. As of the end of the sessions, assuming all countries fulfill their commitments as currently planned, which I think is a long shot, we're still at a 1.8 degree warming trajectory, which we know is, a significant difference. That being said, I do think that, and I observed this while I was at the event and in a lot of the rhetoric after. I do think that for maybe the first time, even outside of Paris, the sense of urgency, the sense of people coming together with lots of solutions and possibilities was probably at an all-time high. I mean, some of the things that transpired, like the methane commitment, the GFANS, which is the commitment that Mark Carney spearheaded for the $130 trillion of investment in this transition globally. I mean, those are things that, again, a few years ago, I think were something that we couldn't really foresee happening. Even in some cases, having India come to the table and set a net zero commitment. Yes, it's in 2070, and I know many people have been critical of that timeline. But others that I've spoken to directly have said, for the Modi government to come to the table with a commitment at all is a significant step in the right direction and really, really shows the momentum that's happening overall. Now, I think what you said a moment ago maybe tempers any of my enthusiasm, which is that, as we started to recover economically from the pandemic, we saw this huge increase in demand, um, and in consumer demand. And, unfortunately, the countries that are responsible for fulfilling that demand, like China, were not really prepared for it from an energy perspective. And it sort of recast the challenges that we have in making that transition. And, certainly I think the fact that we find ourselves in a very globalized energy system today, as you pull on the strings of that energy web, you start to quickly see where the problems are. Um, Unfortunately, I think that renewables continue to be a big scapegoat when those problems creep up, right? Whether it's last winter in Texas, where the grid failed and the finger pointing was at renewables, later to be discovered really natural gas was the culprit, or the current European energy crisis and some of the difficulty that we had in wind generation there last summer. Like, there's still enough skepticism, I think, about renewables that tends to happen. But I think the broader spirit globally that came out of the COP26 event was that this is now an inevitability. This is happening. Nobody's saying we can't do it or we're going to drag our feet. It's a matter of maybe accelerating and getting us where we need to be on time. But there was a definite sense, and I experienced this on the ground, of the inevitability of this transition. And that's really the first time that I think I had seen or felt that.
So, what about you? You touched on it just now about the crisis in. So we just haven't. It's not just a climate crisis now in Europe, and I think we are seeing this across the world, where we've got a financial crisis regarding the cost of energy, and we had some slumps in wind, and temperature and sun, etc., in last year, which created problems on our storage. We see the Chinese buying significant amounts of gas, sucking all of that, then the storage of the gas over into Asia, etc. And we had we had the boat get stuck into the canal, which caused another loads of problems. We had boats flying all over the world with gas being taken from A to B because the prices were better. They was getting, the trading, because they trade out at sea basically. So we see all this happening, and we're seeing this global crisis. So that must be impacting as well on where we're going with all of this, mustn't it?
Absolutely. And although I would characterize our current circumstances as a crisis, from our perspective at Schneider, this is a bit of the new normal. The globalization of the energy system and the complexity of the energy system is here to stay. Um, and again, I think that the challenge that I see is that there continues to be the skepticism around the intermittency of renewables, and that we don't yet have a scaled solution for the replacement of baseload generation that we can achieve through fossil sources. Um, Obviously, I think that in the same way that we've seen renewables scale over the last 15 years, we'll see battery storage scale rapidly. But that brings its own share of problems, particularly in terms of resource management, rare earths, minerals, recyclability, etc. And so, I'm the first to say that renewable energy is not a magic solution that's going to solve all of our problems. It's going to create a new set of problems. And so I think that we've got to really pay attention to all of the potential sources and solutions that may be in front of us, including those that might seem far out there. There's a lot of those in the marketplace, but also to the point of even reimagining the grid, right? If we've got this very large global interconnected grid that's highly vulnerable to these sort of pushes and pulls of supply and demand and resource constraints, one solution, and certainly one that is theorized, is a far more decentralized grid system where you've got smaller, more localized grids that can be more responsive to local conditions, and where each person, each outlet in the grid really becomes a node of the grid that is both a consumer and a generator of energy, so that you have a more even and flexible ability to spread out those supply and demand challenges. And, we've talked, I think, here at Schneider, and even some of the thought leaders on this topic in the space, like Tony Seba, and it feels very much sort of like futuristic, right? That we would all have these neighborhood grids that were managed locally, that had local resources, that had this flexible prosumer design. But I fully believe that really is where we are going in order to try to overcome some of this volatility that really is here to stay. Because to your point, I mean, especially for an organization, when your commodity price that you budgeted for is suddenly 2, 3, 4, 10 times what you had planned on, that has a significant material financial impact to your business. And so as a result, what we're also seeing is that energy and resource management, and even sustainability adjacent to that management, is becoming much more centralized in organizations. It used to be kind of out on the fringes. The energy managers were maybe in plant facilities, and sustainability was, one person managing it sort of on the fringe. Now we're at a point where sustainability, energy management, resource management has a seat at the table and is front and center for C-level executives and their consideration.
Well, it has to be, because energy is your third largest expense.
That's exactly right.
And and I learned that when I was with Schneider or Satchel in my early days. So when I worked within that industry, our focus wasn't necessarily on the renewable supply of energy. It was on the demand side. Now, we've talked today about the supply of renewables and generation. Do you get involved in demand side of that, the managing people's energy usage to bring that down? Is that a focus that you would do within your role?
So I'm part of our sustainability business at Schneider, and we are the professional services arm for the company. What that allows us to do is to work with other companies to help them strategize this resource management piece, and then to really identify and implement solutions to help them achieve that strategy. Mm-hmm. And so, depending on where our clients are in their own journey towards decarbonization, they may be at a beginning stage where still, the acquisition and management of energy is a priority for them, but where we may be able to be influential in terms of helping them to understand how the price of renewable energy has come down and how they need to be considering adding renewable energy to their portfolio. On the other end of the spectrum, we might have clients that are very strong leaders in decarbonization. They've made commitments to something like a science-based decarbonization target, the RE100, where they want to acquire 100% renewable energy, and we're helping them to really realize the achievement of those goals. Demand response has not historically been part of that package. We work a lot, of course, with other organizations that specialize in demand response. But part of what we do within our team is to help organizations become more efficient. And there's that old saying that, a watt that you use is not a watt that you need to replace with renewables, right? Yeah. So we want to help organizations to become as efficient as possible. And increasingly, that means really electrifying operations as the grid continues to decarbonize. That is one of the most effective and efficient ways to also decarbonize your own business, is to electrify. And then we also, of course, really work closely with our customers, looking at their own demand and signals within the market around peaks in energy, so that they can be empowered to make choices around curtailment, for instance. So if we know, for example, through our predictive analytics, that we're expecting a peak to occur in a certain geography, we can let our clients know that that peak is anticipated, and that can help them make real-time decisions about curtailment. I think that, again, I think that for us to get our arms around this whole ball of wax, the energy transition itself from a technological perspective, the decarbonization transition from a climate perspective, it's going to take an all of the above solution, right? So if you're an organization, you've got to be addressing all of these issues, reducing your resources, replacing those resources with cleaner sources, being influential in your value chain, and putting mandates out to your suppliers to follow suit, working closely with your utilities or other suppliers on programs like demand response, considering smart grids, considering microgrids, that more localized source of generation from a resiliency perspective. It's going to take all of that to get us to a point where we can successfully make those transitions.
I agree. And I also would bring in the environmental side, planting trees, looking at the circular economy, and all those extra areas that do contribute to what we're trying to achieve, to protect the seas, protect our wildlife. It's a whole complete approach, and not one solution is going to lead it. With all the solutions got to work together, haven't they?
That's right. That's right.
Do you get involved with that side, like planting trees and offsetting? For me, offsetting isn't the right thing to do, but we've got no choice. We're going to have to go down that route. Do you get involved with offsetting?
We do. And I'm glad you asked because, offsetting, to your point, I think is a bit of a necessary technology, at least for where we are today. And the reason that I say that is that there are not scalable solutions to reduce emissions in some of these areas of operations yet. And so offsets provides an interim solution. I also think that, and you referenced a few, certainly part of our natural ecosystem. Effectively, you can think of them as natural services, Paul, right? The ocean, the cryosphere, soil, trees, all of those are very important partners to us in the climate fight, because in all of those cases, those are sources of carbon sequestration, right? They hold carbon. That's an important function of reducing carbon, pulling down carbon. And so the protecting of those natural systems, those biospheres, is very important. For our clients and how we help them approach carbon offsetting, we really try to take a portfolio approach to really looking at not just that they want to go to market to source those offsets, but how can we really help them think about that as part of a holistic program that includes that fundamental resource reduction and the evaluation and investment in new technologies. And then we also really ensure that any project that we're recommending to them is a highly credible, highly additional project, right? So it's not something that really isn't reducing carbon at the end of the day, but something that is we use the term charismatic, something that's far more charismatic in terms of what it can do from an avoidance or a sequestration perspective, but then also, and this is an increasing area of interest for our clients, what it can do for a community. So is it creating jobs? Is it improving human health impacts in that community? Is it really, adding to or protecting biodiversity in that community? And for us, a highly credible offset checks all of those boxes, that it's both helping to counterbalance those unavoidable emissions, but then also really has a restorative or protective quality in the community from which we're sourcing those projects.
Amy, you've really added some great contribution to our listeners today with your vocabulary around this. It's been very refreshing to hear, and for a large organization that's behind you delivering this. So for me today, it's quite refreshing, as I say, to hear that organizations out there of your size are trying to deliver what we need in this industry. I interview a lot of individuals, not big organizations, that are trying to do this, but to hear a big organization behind this is, as I say, it's very refreshing. So it comes to, if you have listened to my podcast, this is my favorite spot actually, because I always see my interviewee start to smile and thinking, oh, blimey, what's he going to ask me now? I've got to put you on the spot. So, Amy, it's at this stage that I do ask my my guests if there's something that you can give back to the industry today as a takeaway for our listeners.
One of the most valuable and really resonant things that I heard while I was COP, I really appreciated this statement, was that at some level, the energy transition is inevitable, even if we were not facing the climate crisis. Transitioning away from extractive-based energy to technology-based energy is inevitable because eventually we're going to run out of fossil fuels. It's not going to be tomorrow. We know that, but it's going to happen eventually. And so it's kind of like tearing off a Band-Aid, right? Yeah. We've got this other urgency of the climate crisis. And so we've just got to take a big bite of the apple and make it happen, because we would have to do it inevitably, no matter what. And for me, I felt so buoyed by that, because sometimes, and I think probably many of my friends and colleagues in this industry would say the same, it can be a bit of a double-edged sword. Like on the one hand, feeling excited and optimistic, and on the other hand, feeling we're not moving fast enough, we're dragging our feet. But for me, that comment really was a little bit of the sort of spiritual nourishment I needed, if you will, to say, we're doing the right thing. And the faster we can do it for the planet, the better. But this is a transition that would have had to happen no matter what. And so I guess I share that, Paul, because I know that sometimes this work can be hard. It can be inspired and inspiring, but sometimes it can be challenging, and just hope that others take that same spirit of optimism that I did.
Yeah, that's amazing. And it's really great that you've actually witnessed the COP. I've interviewed other people that have been there and felt the same. You know, they've had their opinions about what their result was from that period of time. And for me, there's a massive build up. We see loads of people there. We see some big leaders there. And now we're on to the next part of the news. It's disappeared. I want to see some momentum with it, but that goes behind it. And I think having it every 4 years for me isn't the right thing. I'm a football fan. I love the World Cup. The World Cup for me is the highlight of my football season, but I have to wait every 4 years for that. Why are we having to wait for every 4 years for COP? You know, it should be I know it's expensive to run, but we should have some form of ongoing annual catch up for that. And I don't think there is enough of momentum there. So that's my 2 pennies worth.
I agree. I agree, Paul. And the other thing I took away from it was talk only gets us so far. It's action that really matters now.
Exactly. And on that note, Amy, look, it's been really great talking to you. I'm jealous about the snow where you are at the moment, but that's another story. But you go and enjoy your skiing or whatever you're going to do at the weekend. But Amy, please, you and your family, stay safe at these times.
Thank you so much, Paul, and thank you for having me.
You're welcome. Take care.